To mark the 10th anniversary of the June 30th revolution, President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi addressed the nation on Friday. In his address, the president congratulated the Egyptian people on this occasion, which also coincides with this year's Eid al-Adha. The head of state said that history was full of many glorious days, the forefront of which was the 30th of June 2013 revolution. President al-Sisi added that the Egyptians rose against those who wanted to kidnap the country, noting that the revolution highlighted the unity of the Egyptian people under a pure Egyptian identity, which knew no discrimination or division. The head of state said that the Egyptian steadfastness at the time of the revolution shall be subject to many studies by intellectuals and researchers. Also on his social media accounts, President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi greeted the Egyptian people, marking the 10th anniversary of the June 30th revolution. The head of state said that the people set the greatest example of patriotism and showed a deep sense of belonging to their identity and proved to be much stronger than their enemy imagined, foiling their means and attempts to destroy the nation. The president saluted all Egyptians, the armed forces, the police, and all those working in the domains. The head of state said that he renews his vow, reiterating that Egypt will continue in the right path of achievement despite all the challenges, asking God to preserve the nation and its people. The president concluded his post by saying, Tahya Masr, or long live Egypt. Via her social media accounts, Egypt's First Lady, Ms. Intisar al-Sisi, on Friday offered her greetings to Egyptians, marking the 10th anniversary of the June 30th revolution. Mrs. Intisar said that during the revolution, the Egyptians displayed a magnificent historical scene of love to their homeland, defending it and sacrificing their souls to protect them from evil and the terrorist forces. She ended her post calling on God Almighty to protect the country and bless its great people. Also marking the 10th anniversary of the June 30th revolution, the Ministry of Defense released a documentary showcasing achievements since the revolution and praised the unique bond that unites the Egyptian people and their armed forces and police. The documentary, entitled A Revolution for Building a Country on June 30th, started with the people's first revolution in Egypt's modern history on the 25th of January 2011, which led to the departure of President Hosni Mubarak and the transfer of power to the Supreme Council of the Armed Forces. The Supreme Council temporarily ruled the country until national elections were held, which unfortunately delivered power to a civilian president who fell in the grip of a terrorist brotherhood group, which became the de facto ruler of the country. A year later, the Egyptians' awareness of the terrorist group's plans for their country's destruction led them to revolt, foil the plots, and restore their homeland with the alignment of the national army to the people's will. After the success of the revolution, another electoral process was held, which handed power to President Adli Mansour and then the chief of the Supreme Constitutional Court. Later, and upon the call of the Egyptian people, the Minister of Defense, Field Marshal Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, ran in the presidential elections and won, with the speaking majority, leading the country into a new era of accomplishments, reconstruction and development. Over the past 8 years, under the president's leadership, Egypt managed to achieve comprehensive development in all fields, rebuild its diplomatic ties with many countries, and restore its pioneering role at a regional and international arena. Joining us over the phone is Ambassador Gamal Bayoumi, the former Assistant Foreign Minister. Good evening to you, Mr. Ambassador.
Good evening. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you. My pleasure.
Sir, the June 30th revolution was a major departure for the Egyptian history, part of the Egyptian history. What do you see 10 years on when it comes to the achievements that have been achieved here in this country?
I don't want to even to remember those days.
Yes.
We were entering in a very dark room and a sort of system of governing much below the communists. one opinion, one party, and just one forcing itself on all the other forces. We were losing our liberty. We were losing our identity.
Yes.
Even Egypt became one Islamic small country among the big Islamic. I don't know what. That was really a serious problem facing us, facing our future. Thank God that it ended peacefully. Thank God that it ended by the forces of the street. I must confess to you that I don't join any gathering like this. My age doesn't allow me to do so. But that day, I was invited to join a TV show. It was going on through a balcony of the Pyramid Hotel. So I saw that gathering. I couldn't believe that all these people are there to say big no to that system. Thank God we put this behind us. Now, as a diplomat, I'm so proud of our diplomacy. We again the level of presidency supporting our foreign policy. And as an old diplomat, I am always proud of our foreign policy because it is as old as 2,000 years before Christ. And it was always right. We were always right. And all those who oppose our policy, they regret it after 50 years. I can give you examples of big power opposing Gamal Abdel Nasser when he recognized China and Mao Zedong. And after 50 years now, China is the largest partner of the United States who was against our relation with China. And many examples like that. But thank God, now we have an active president, especially in diplomacy. I saw him going to Tokyo twice in 2 months, then to the far west in Paris, to the north in New York, making 40 presidential meetings in 5 days, going to Africa, going to a country which I was non-resident ambassador because there isn't any resident there. He went there, he took the Arab construction, we built an embassy, now we have an embassy in this country. A very energetic policy, and this can show you how Cairo is becoming the most capital receiving foreign missions, whether embassies or representatives of regional or international organizations. This is something we are proud about. Many countries are making Cairo is the center to continue its relations with the other countries in Africa or the Arab world. When the Europeans wanted to make a conference for 68 head of states of Europe and Africa, they chose Sharm el-Sheikh to come. And when they wanted to see the Arab world, they came to Egypt. When President Obama wanted to make a speech addressing the whole Islamic world, he came to Cairo University. This shows you how strong our appearance and how strong is our foreign policy and how the countries and big powers and all the countries of the world are looking at.
Sir, one significant point during the June 30th revolution was the 3rd of July, when there were a lot of decisions taken to get rid of what was passed. How significant were these decisions, and how did they actually change the course of history for this country?
It was very wise sort of decisions. Many decisions were taken at this specific time. Especially to go to the palace and to have elections. That saves us in many organizations such as the African Union, because they stopped our membership because of the movement, and then when they saw that we have an elected president, they changed the position. So it was very good to come again to a democratic way to choose our president and our government. Now it is normal that we have direct relations with every single head of state.
Yes. Mr. Ambassador, thank you so much for joining us over the phone. This was Ambassador Gamal Bayoumi, the former Assistant Foreign Minister, telling us about the significance of the June 30th revolution 10 years on. We're going to take a short break and move on with the rest of the episode. Cairo and Ankara said Tuesday they had appointed ambassadors to each other's countries for the first time in a decade. Cairo and Ankara both issued statements announcing the upgrading of diplomatic relations between them to the level of ambassadors. The two foreign ministries said the move aims to renormalize relations between the two countries and reflects the mutual will to develop bilateral relations. Cairo named Amr al-Hamami as the new ambassador in Ankara, while Turkey named Saleh Mutalo Send as its ambassador in Cairo. Egypt strongly denounced the Israeli occupation army's aggressions in the occupied West Bank city of Jenin, where at least 10 Palestinians were killed during an Israeli military aggression in the occupied West Bank town of Jenin, which continued for a second day. Here's a story.
Thousands of people were evacuated from the Jenin refugee camp as one of Israel's biggest military operations in years moved to a second day on Tuesday, and a suspected car ramming attack in Tel Aviv underlined the risk of a spillover in violence. The operation, which the army said was aimed at destroying infrastructure of the camp, was launched with a drone strike in the early hours of Monday and continued all day with hundreds of troops. At least 10 people have been killed. In Jenin, sporadic gunfire and explosions sounded near the refugee camp, but parts of the city were quiet and life proceeded in normality. Late on Monday, the Palestinian Red Crescent said it had evacuated 500 families from the camp, or around 3,000 people, and UN agencies expressed alarm at the scale of the air and ground operation. Echoing Palestinian emergency services, the World Health Organization said first responders had been prevented from entering the camp to reach the wounded people. However, power and water supplies remained cut off in the camp and in some areas of the city after bulldozers that plowed up roads looking for improvised bombs cut power cables and a main water pipe. A Palestinian wounded during the clashes died overnight, and another body was found in the morning, bringing the death toll to 10. With around 100 wounded, 20 of them critically, the Palestinian Health Ministry said in another that Palestinian was killed in Ramallah on Monday. Offices and businesses across the occupied West Bank were closed on Tuesday in response to calls for a general strike to protest the operation, which the Palestinian Authority has described as a war crime. International reaction to the operation has been mixed. The United States said it respected Israel's right to defend itself, but said it was imperative to avoid civilian casualties. Mohammed Mustafa Orfi, Egypt's permanent representative to the Arab League, said the operation would hinder efforts to bring reconciliation after months of escalating violence. The densely populated camp, where some 14,000 people live in less than half of a square kilometer, has been one of the local points of a wave of violence that has swept the West Bank for more than a year.
The Arab League is to hold an emergency meeting Tuesday to discuss an Arab mobilization to counter the Israeli occupation's attack on Jenin. Palestine's permanent representative to the Arab League said Palestine called the emergency meeting in coordination with the Egyptian and Jordanian sides to discuss moves on the Arab and international levels to stop the aggression and hold those responsible accountable. He said the meeting was also called to demand international protection for the Palestinian people. The Arab League is to issue a statement detailing the outcome of the meeting and measures taken following the conclusion of the meeting. United Nations Secretary-General Antonio Guterres is deeply concerned about the developments in Jenin. Deputy UN spokesperson Farhan Haq made the statement after Israeli occupation forces hit the West Bank city with drone strikes in one of the largest operations in the area in 20 years. He said Guterres affirms that all military operations must be conducted with full respect for international humanitarian law. The United Nations said the Jenin camp has one of the highest rates of unemployment and poverty among West Bank camps, and the military operation disrupted water and electricity to large areas of it. Britain, Australia and Canada have called on Israel's government to reverse a decision to approve new settlement units in the West Bank, saying they are deeply concerned by an ongoing cycle of violence. This week, Israel approved over 5,700 new settlement units in the West Bank, and earlier this month instituted changes to the settlement approval process, which facilitates swifter approval of construction. The continued expansion of settlements is an obstacle to peace that negatively impacts efforts to achieve a negotiated two-state solution, the foreign ministers of Britain, Australia and Canada said in a joint statement. Violence has been surging in the West Bank, including deadly clashes in Jenin. Joining us over the phone to tell us more about this is Dr. Sharif Amir, a political analyst. Good evening to you, sir. Dr. Sharif, can you hear me?
Yeah, I hear you.
Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
We've seen a very big escalation from the Israeli side by attacking the Jenin camp. How do you read this, and are the emergency meetings that are going to be held, that are held by the Arab League and what the UN has said, going to be of any significance towards ending this violence?
Well, I don't think that it will help in ending the violence because it was planned by the Israeli government and according to Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli Prime Minister, the operation has ended, but it's not the end, it's the beginning, meaning that there will be more escalation in the coming future. The main question is how the Arab world will react to this and how they will enhance the Palestinian cause in the international community. What we are witnessing now is a double action from the Israeli government, the military action and also the settlement action. The settlements are being the projects are going on as normal, and in the same time the security operations are going on, and the escalation is not going to stop soon. I think that the Palestinian Authority is trying to ask the help of the international community because it has to be, something has to be done to bring both sides again to the negotiating table. Egypt made all the efforts now to stop this escalation. I think that the Egyptian mediation is trying to bring things into calm. We have asked also the Arab League to convene so we can have a unit, one voice of the Arab states, especially the Gulf states, about this escalation. But it seems that the Israelis have a security plan. Let's not forget also that in Israel there is the internal problem of the legislation, the reforms in the judicial system, and people are not happy. So the Israeli government is trying also to divert the attention of the people towards this kind of operations because it unites the Israelis as they have an enemy inside the territories and they have to fight. So there are so many issues in this escalation. but the people are paying the price. The Palestinians are paying the price. And I think that that's time also for the Hamas and the Jihad movement to join forces with the Palestinian Authority, not to act according to their own agenda, to strengthen the unity. It's time to be united. So if there will be any negotiations in the future, it will be representing the whole Palestinian sphere.
Okay, Dr. Sharif Amir, a political analyst, thank you so much for joining us over the phone. We're going to take a short break and move on with the rest of the episode. Overnight violence in French cities have halved in 24 hours, a week after riots erupted over a police killing of a teenager at a traffic stop. The Interior Ministry said Tuesday that 72 people were arrested overnight nationwide, including 24 in and around Paris, and 24 buildings torched or damaged. 72 people were also arrested nationwide. A statement said that 159 vehicles had been set ablaze and 202 fires set in rubbish bins or elsewhere in public areas. 4 officers or police or gendarmes came under attack. There were no injuries. Police mobilization had kept at the same level as the 2 previous nights, at 45,000 in all of France. The government has battled riots and looting since 17-year-old Nile M was killed by an officer during a traffic stop on Tuesday just outside of Paris, rekindling long-standing accusations of systemic racism among security forces. Mayors across France held rallies Monday calling for an end to the violent clashes. Monday's demonstrations calling for a return to Republican order came after the home of the mayor of Paris suburb was rammed by a burning car, prompting widespread outrage. A total of 157 people had been arrested overnight Sunday to Monday, already a sharp decline from the number held the night before. President Emmanuel Macron was on Tuesday to meet with the mayors of 220 municipalities that had suffered damages during the riots. Russia said on Tuesday it had downed 5 Ukrainian drones in the Moscow region, calling it a terrorist act that disrupted the functioning of the Vankovo International Airport. The story. Ukraine announced on Tuesday that 31 people, including 9 children, were hospitalized following a Russian strike on the town of Permasky in the eastern Kharkiv region. Officials said the strike had hit a parking lot outside the residential building in the town of some 28,000 people. The head of Kyiv's presidential office said that 9 of those were children, including 2 babies aged 1 and 10 months. The official noted that they were wounded after the Russians fired a high-explosive shell, adding that as a result, several cars in the parking lot had caught fire. He said the windows of 8 multi-story buildings were smashed, while posting images of burned and destroyed cars, some of which were lying upside down or on their side. The governor of Kharkiv region posted a video from the scene showing smoke rising from the burnt cars near a Soviet-era housing block. Russia, which began its full-scale military operation in Ukraine in February 2022, did not immediately comment on the incident. Permovsky is around 80 kilometers south of the regional capital Kharkiv. It is relatively far from the current fighting hotspots in the Donbass region. The Kharkiv region, which borders Russia, saw heavy fighting at the start of Moscow's invasion launched last year, with Russian troops crossing into Ukraine through the region. Moving to business and finance, the yen was firm on Tuesday but remained vulnerable to more weaknesses as markets were on alert for signs of intervention, while the Australian dollar dropped after the country's central bank chose to stand pat on interest rates. The Reserve Bank of Australia held interest rates at 4.1%, saying it wanted more time to assess the impact. The yen last fetched 144.64 per dollar in Asian hours, remained close to last week's 8-month low of 145.07 dollar. Earlier on Tuesday, Japan's top financial diplomat Masato Kanda said that officials were in close contact with U.S. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen and other overseas authorities almost every day on currencies and broader financial markets. The Australian dollar had slid at 0.3%, and the euro was down 0.13% to $1.0897, while the sterling was last at $1.2658, down 0.05% on the day, while the New Zealand dollar eased 0.15% at $0.614. The pace of decline in Britain's manufacturing sector steepened in June, and optimism faded despite weakening price pressures, a survey showed on Monday. The S&P Global UK Manufacturing Purchasing Managers Index fell to 46.5 from 47.1 in May, its lowest reading this year, and one of the weakest since 2008-2009 financial crisis, but revised up from earlier preliminary flash readings of 46.2. Costs paid by factories for materials and energy fell by the most since February 2016, while prices charged by manufacturers dropped for the first time since 2016. The Bank of England is watching indicators of price pressures closely as it judges how many more interest rate hikes are needed to control Britain's rate of inflation, which in May was the joint highest among major advanced economies along with Italy. The PMI's gauge of future output fell to its lowest level this year, with employment contracting for 9 months running. A final PMI reading for the much larger services sector is due Wednesday. Australia's central bank on Tuesday held interest rates steady, saying it wanted more time to assess the impact of past hikes, but reiterated its warning that further tightening might be needed to bring inflation to heel. Wrapping up its July policy meeting, the Reserve Bank of Australia kept its cash rate at 11-year highs of 4.1%, having lifted rates by 400 basis points since May last year, in the most aggressive tightening cycle in modern history to tame inflation. Markets had been leaning towards a pause, but economists were split on the outcome, with 60 out of 31 polled by Reuters expecting a hike and the rest forecasting the bank to stand pat. The Australian dollar dipped 0.4%, but has since recouped all the losses. Traders expect at least one more hike in the current cycle. The market has now shifted to imply around a 50-50 chance of a hike of 4.35% in August, scaling back in the risk of further moves of 4.6%. Italy aims to generate nearly 2/3 of its electricity from renewable energy sources by the end of the decade, the Energy Ministry said on Friday, slightly improving targets made public 3 years ago. In a revision of the country's energy and climate plan, the ministry said Italy aimed to get 65% of its electricity from renewables by 2030, up from a previous target of 55%. Renewables are expected to cover 40% of gross energy consumption in all the sectors, including power production, housing and transportation. For heating and air conditioning, renewable sources should provide 37% of the consumption and 31% in the transport sector. Its ambitions is that hydrogen produced without carbon emissions will cover 42% of the industrial needs by 2030. Joining us over the phone to tell us more about this is Dr. Salah Hafiz, the former head of the Environmental Affairs Agency and former vice president of the Petroleum Authority. Good evening to you, sir.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. Sir, the Italians have quite an ambitious plan for 2030, which is they want about 2/3 of their energy to be renewable energy. How feasible is this actually?
Well, it was clearly announced in the last COP meeting 27 that the whole world has to stop increasing the carbon dioxide by 2050. Mm-hmm. So this means we call it net zero carbon, mm-hmm. meaning that the carbon that the whole world is producing in carbon dioxide is absorbed by the natural things that exist, like forestry and the oceans and the water at large and all vegetation. Mm-hmm. But the problem now that the whole world is producing or emitting more carbon dioxide than the system can sustain.
Yes.
So the big emitters of the carbon dioxide have pledged in the last COP meeting that by the year 2050 they will have stopped producing carbon dioxide excess of the normal one. So this step from Italy, which is a big emitter of carbon dioxide, is quite important in achieving this target.
Sir, will the Italians and the European Union in general import renewable energy from countries that produce it, whether it be solar power or wind power?
Well, the renewable energy is energy that is not consuming fossil fuel. Like wind energy and, as you said, solar energy, green hydrogen, and of course the gas, the natural gas, is an emitter of carbon dioxide, so this is not included. Yes. So they are net importer of energy at large, but they are slowing down in importing the fossil fuel, the energy that is produced from the fossil fuel, and getting renewable energy.
Yes.
The wind, they produce some local from the wind and from solar, because the solar doesn't mean only sun, but the photons within the rays of the sun, which is available in Europe. So they produce that as well, and they import, of course, from other countries as well.
Okay, Dr. Salah Hafiz, a former head of the Environmental Affairs Agency and former Vice President of the Petroleum Authority. Thank you so much for joining us. We're going to take a short break and move on with the episode. Moving to arts and culture, a Thai elephant gifted to Sri Lanka 2 decades ago arrived back in its birth country Sunday following a diplomatic spat over the animal's alleged mistreatment. Here's the story. A Thai elephant gifted to Sri Lanka 2 decades ago was flown back to its birth country on Sunday after a diplomatic spat over the animal's alleged mistreatment. Thai authorities had gifted the 29-year-old Matu Raja, also known back in its birthplace as Saksuren, to Sri Lanka in 2001. But they demanded it back last year after allegations it was tortured and neglected while housed at a Buddhist temple in the island nation's south. The 4,000-kilogram mammal flew out from Colombo Airport on Sunday morning on a one-way commercial flight for a repatriation that Thai officials said had cost $700,000. After touching down in Chiang Mai, the elephant will be quarantined at a nearby nature reserve. It was taken from its temporary home at a zoo in Colombo before dawn in a special steel cage the size of a shipping container. 4 Thai handlers alongside a Sri Lankan keeper are accompanying the elephant on the flight, and 2 CCTV cameras will monitor its health in transit. Animal welfare groups said the elephant had been forced to work with a logging crew and its wounds, some allegedly inflicted by its handlers, had been neglected. The elephant will undergo hydrotherapy to treat a remaining injury on its front left leg when it returns to Thailand's Pereira said. Moving on to sports news, where former Liverpool captain Steven Gerrard is the latest star name to make a move to Saudi Arabia after signing a deal to become head coach of Al Ittifaq. The 43-year-old has been out of the game since being sacked by Aston Villa in October. The story. Steven
Steven Gerrard has been appointed coach of Saudi side Al Ittifaq, having previously decided against taking up the position. The former Liverpool and England midfielder said last month that he would not be taking up an offer to join the team. However, the 43-year-old has had a change of heart and becomes the latest big name to join the growing league. Al Ittifaq wrote on Twitter that Steven Gerrard is their new head coach, adding that he is no stranger to silverware, a legend who brings a glorious history and exciting future to Al Ittifaq. Club President Khalid Al-Dabal expressed his happiness after Gerrard signed a 2-year deal. Al-Dabal described the deal as one of the most famous and influential at the level of the Saudi Pro League. The 43-year-old guided Rangers to their first Scottish Premiership title in 10 years in 2021 before leaving for Aston Villa, where he was sacked last October. He follows in the footsteps of his former teammate Ruby Fowler, who was appointed coach of Saudi second division team Al Qadisiyah on Thursday. Former Liverpool captain Gerrard won the Champions League in 2005, but never won the Premier League in his 17-year spell with the Reds. Gerrard's move is the latest in a number of high-profile deals since Al Nassr signed Cristiano Ronaldo last December. Former Real Madrid striker Karim Benzema joined Al Ittihad in June. Al Ittifaq finished 7th in the top-tier Saudi Pro League last season. Last week, Al Hilal reappointed Portuguese Jorge Jesus as their coach on a 1-year deal.
Liverpool have signed versatile Hungarian midfielder Dominik Szoboszlai from Bundesliga side RB Leipzig. The 22-year-old Hungary captain arrives at Anfield after British media reported Liverpool paid a €70 million release clause in his contract. He becomes the club's second recruit under new sporting director Jörg Schmackstedt after Argentine Alexis McAllister, as Liverpool look to revamp their midfield following a disappointing season. Belgian sprinter Jasper Philipsen outpaced and outmuscled the other fast men to take the high-speed bunch finish at the end of the third stage of the Tour de France. The Alpecin rider appeared to cut off a rival as he moved to his right in the final, but the race commissioners approved the Belgians' win ahead of Phil Bauers and Caleb Ewan. English rider Adam Yates of the UAE team retained the overall lead as all the chief contenders finished together after a 128-kilometer run from northern Spain to Bayonne. Victor Lafay, who remained fourth overall, retained the sprint points green jersey, while 2020 and 2021 champion Taj Pogačar kept the second place and the best young rider's white tunic. Philipsen attracted ridicule from the Tour de France last year for celebrating what he believed to be a stage win, when in fact Wout van Aert had already crossed the line on a solo escape. Orange hats and green and red Basque flags were ever present on the early climbs as American rider Neilson Powless extended his lead in the mountain classification. As the Tour caravan crossed the border, fans cheered breakaway rider Frenchman Laurent Pichon of Arkea Salzburg, which every push of the pedal, but he caught 30 kilometers from home. Tuesday's stage 4 is largely a flat 182-kilometer run from Dax and Agoro, with a racing circuit finish line which should culminate in another mass sprint. This brings us to the end of this episode of Nile TV Newsroom Live, but stay tuned for more here on Nile TV.